In the unforgiving jungles of Vietnam, Staff Sergeant Daniel "Ghost" Callahan was leading his elite reconnaissance squad through hostile terrain, their mission to disrupt a critical Viet Cong supply route. What should have been another calculated strike turned into a bloodbath when the night erupted in coordinated gunfire and rocket blasts. A routine patrol became an ambush. The trees spat bullets. Shadows moved with deadly precision. The Viet Cong had planned for this moment, surrounding them, cutting off their escape, tearing through their ranks. Daniel Callahan wasn't just another soldier. For 12 years, he had honed his craft as one of the Marine Corps' deadliest snipers. Born and raised tracking prey in Montana's backcountry, he had once held the longest confirmed kill in the Quang Tri sector, a ghost, in the jungle unseen until it was too late. But this wasn't a war of distance, this was survival. As his team fell one by one, Callahan realized the truth. This wasn't just an ambush. The enemy had come for him. The Viet Cong thought they had trapped a squad of Marines. They didn't. No, they had just caged a predator. Wounded, alone, and outnumbered, Callahan would turn the jungle into his hunting ground. What began as an ambush would become a massacre. By the time the sun rose over Quang Tri, the Viet Cong would know. Some ghosts never die. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The jungle breathed. Staff Sergeant Daniel "Ghost" Callahan felt it in his bones, the way the air thickened and thinned with each pulse of the night, how the darkness seemed to ripple like a living thing. 19 years of hunting in Montana's wilderness had taught him to read nature's signals, but this was different. The Vietnamese jungle didn't just breathe, it hungered. "Ghost." Corporal Miguel "Hawk" Ramirez's whisper barely carried over, the symphony of insects. His spotter crouched beside him, dark eyes scanning the tree line. Something's off. Callahan didn't respond immediately. He'd learned to trust Hawk's instincts as much as his own. They'd been through hell together, two ghosts in a war that created nothing but ghosts. Instead, he studied the darkness through his scope, letting his trained eye drift over each shadow, each subtle movement of foliage. The rest of the squad moved with practiced silence behind them. 6 men, each chosen for their ability to become invisible when needed. Their mission was simple: locate and disrupt a crucial Viet Cong supply route before the enemy could launch their next offensive. Simple, but not easy. Nothing was ever easy in this godforsaken country. "Tracks," Hawk murmured, gesturing to barely visible impressions in the mud. "Fresh. Multiple sets. They're moving supplies through here, but..." He hesitated, finger tracing the air above the earth. "But what?" Callahan kept his voice low, steady. The weight of his M40 sniper rifle felt reassuring against his shoulder. "The pattern's wrong. These aren't supply carriers. Too deliberate, too..." Hawk's eyes widened suddenly. "Ghost, this is..." The night exploded. The crack of AK-47 fire shattered the darkness, followed instantly by the distinctive whoosh of an RPG. "Contact front, 3 o'clock. Someone screamed. Maybe Jenkins, maybe Thompson. It didn't matter. The jungle had come alive with muzzle flashes, the air thick with flying lead and splintered wood. Callahan's world narrowed to instinct and training. "Spread out, return fire." He squeezed off 2 shots, dropping a shadow that moved too quickly between trees. Beside him, Hawk was already calling coordinates, his voice steady despite the chaos. But something was wrong. The enemy fire wasn't random. It was coordinated, precise. They'd walked right into it. The realization hit Callahan like a physical blow. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was an ambush. "Fall back. They've got us." "Zeroed." But even as he gave the order, Callahan knew it was too late. The night air filled with screams as his squad was cut down one by one. Thompson took a burst to the chest. Martinez disappeared in an explosion that showered the jungle floor with bloody leaves. "Ghost!" Hawk's voice cut through the mayhem. "On your 6. Callahan spun, rifle coming up, but the RPG was already airborne. The explosion threw him backward, slamming him into a tree trunk with bone-crushing force. His ears rang, vision blurring as smoke and cordite filled his lungs. Hawk! He tried to stand, failed. Hawk, report! Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Hawk's voice. Calm, almost peaceful. Sorry, brother. Looks like this is my stop. A single shot cracked through the night, then silence. Callahan forced himself to move, ignoring the white-hot pain in his side. He crawled through undergrowth slick with blood, his own, his team's. He couldn't tell anymore. The firefight had shifted, the VC moving through the killing field to confirm their work. Professional, methodical. He pressed himself into the earth as voices approached, Vietnamese, speaking in hushed tones. Through the fog of pain and confusion, one phrase cut through clearly. Find the sniper. They knew. Somehow they'd known exactly who they were hunting. Callahan felt something shift inside him, something cold and familiar. The part of him that had learned to track elk through Montana snowstorms at age 12. The part that had made him the most feared sniper in this sector of Vietnam. They wanted to hunt a ghost? Fine. He'd give them a ghost. But they'd learn what? His instructors had always said, a wounded predator is the most dangerous kind. The jungle breathed around him, hungry for more blood. Callahan was happy to oblige. They'd killed his team, killed Hawk. Now they'd learn why some ghosts were better, left alone. He melted into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness. The hunt was about to begin. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The taste of copper filled Callahan's mouth as consciousness returned. He lay motionless, face pressed against damp earth, letting his senses slowly recalibrate. The firefight had ended, replaced by something worse. Methodical execution shots punctuated by voices speaking rapid Vietnamese. Get up, ghost. Hawk's voice, clear as day in his mind. They're coming. His side screamed in protest as he dragged himself deeper into the undergrowth. Shrapnel wounds, maybe a cracked rib. Nothing immediately fatal, but enough to slow him down. He pulled a compression bandage from his vest, wrapping it tight around his torso. The pain helped sharpen his focus. Through gaps in the foliage, he watched them work. The VC moved with practiced efficiency, collecting weapons, checking bodies. A tall figure moved among them, Lieutenant Tran Vu, though Callahan didn't know his name yet. The man's movements were predatory, purposeful. He stopped at each American body, ensuring death with a single shot to the head. Callahan's hand tightened on his combat knife as Tran Vu approached Hawk's body. His spotter lay face down, radio equipment still strapped to his back. The lieutenant rolled him over with his boot. This one, Tran Vu spoke in accented English. This was their spotter. He knelt, examining Hawk's equipment. Where is his shooter? A younger soldier responded in Vietnamese, but Callahan understood enough. 7 bodies. There should be 8. Find him, Tran Vu ordered. The sniper is out there. He's wounded. He won't get far. They're wrong about that, brother. Hawk's voice whispered in Callahan's mind. Show them how far a ghost can go. Moving like smoke through the trees, Callahan retrieved his M40 from where it had fallen. The scope was intact. Small mercies. He checked his remaining ammunition. 2 magazines plus the rounds in the chamber. 17 shots total. It would have to be enough. The jungle canopy became his refuge. He climbed carefully, ignoring the protest of his injuries, until he found a perch that offered both concealment and fields of fire. Below, search parties began to spread out, probing the darkness with flashlight beams. Amateur move. They were ruining their night vision, making themselves perfect targets. Callahan settled into his position, becoming one with the shadows. This was familiar ground now. How many times had he waited in Montana tree stands, watching elk move through morning? Missed? The jungle was different, but the principles remained the same. Patience, stillness, the perfect shot. Remember what you taught me, Ghost? Hawk's voice again, a comfort in the darkness. The jungle's not our enemy. It's a weapon, if you know how to use it. Callahan allowed himself a grim smile. He'd learned that lesson well. The VC thought they owned these shadows, but they'd forgotten something crucial. Ghosts could walk in darkness too. Through his scope, he watched Tran Vu direct the search, marking the lieutenant's movements, studying his patterns. Not yet. The timing wasn't right. Let them think they were the hunters. Let them grow confident, careless. A younger VC soldier passed directly below Callahan's position, AK-47 held loosely in untrained hands. The kid couldn't have been more than 17. Easy shot, but not yet. Patience was the difference between a hunter and prey. Smart move, Hawk's phantom voice approved. Wait for the right moment. Make every shot count. Dawn was approaching. Soon the jungle would transform, shadows retreating before the morning light. But that didn't matter anymore. Callahan had become something else in the darkness, something that didn't need shadows to remain unseen. He thought of his team, of Hawk. Their bodies would be collected, recorded as casualties in a war that seemed to have no end. But their deaths wouldn't be meaningless, not after tonight. The VC had come hunting a Marine sniper. Instead, they'd created something far more dangerous. As the first hints of morning painted the eastern sky, Staff Sergeant Daniel "Ghost" Callahan ceased to exist. In his place, a true phantom emerged, a vengeful spirit born of blood and shadow. Below, Tran Vu gathered his men, preparing to widen the search. They still believed they were the predators. "Show them different, brother," Hawk whispered. "Show them what a real ghost can do." Callahan's finger curled around the trigger. The hunt was about to begin. The young VC soldier never saw it coming. One moment he was scanning the underbrush with tired eyes. The next, Callahan's knife found, the soft spot beneath his ear. A quick, clean kill, silent as a falling leaf. "Good hunting," Hawk's voice whispered. "Now use him." Callahan dragged the body behind a fallen tree, quickly stripping it of ammunition and supplies. The soldier's AK-47 would be useful. He couldn't rely solely on his M40 at close range. More importantly, he found a radio, still crackling with Vietnamese transmissions. He positioned the corpse carefully, making it look like the soldier had fallen asleep on watch. An old hunter's trick, learned in Montana's backcountry. The dead could be the perfect bait if you knew how to use them. He didn't have to wait long. "Duck?" Another voice called out softly. "Duke, where are you?" Callahan remained motionless as a second soldier approached, weapon lowered. The man's face showed confusion, then recognition as he spotted his comrade's sleeping form. He reached down to shake the body. The kill was even cleaner than the first. Callahan caught him from behind, one hand over the mouth, knife finding, the heart with surgical precision. 2 down, no shots fired. But the real game was just beginning, miles away. In a carefully concealed command post, Captain Bao Nguyen received the first reports of missing patrols. He sat in contemplative silence, studying a detailed map of the region. Around him, radio operators conveyed orders, coordinating the ongoing search efforts. "Sir?" Lieutenant Tran Vu's voice crackled over the radio. 2 men missing from Sector 4. No sound, no signs of struggle. Bao's fingers traced the map, mind working through possibilities. "The sniper," he said, finally. "He's not running, he's hunting." Back in the jungle, Callahan was already moving. The radio chatter confirmed his suspicions. They were expanding the search but still underestimating him. Good. Fear would be his ally. "Remember what makes a good hunt, Ghost?" Hawk's voice guided him. "It's not about the kill. It's about control." Callahan spotted his next target, a 3-man patrol moving in a sloppy formation. The morning fog gave him cover as he paralleled their route through the canopy. He selected the rear man, the one carrying the radio. The shot, when it came, was perfect. The M40 coughed once, the sound swallowed by the jungle. The radio man dropped without a sound. His companions didn't notice for nearly 30 seconds. Their panic when it hit was beautiful to watch. "Contact!" One of them screamed into his radio. "Way is down. Sniper! Callahan's second shot took him mid-word. The third VC soldier broke into a run, firing blindly into the trees. Amateur, giving away his position, wasting ammunition. Callahan let him run, making them spread out, Hawk approved, using their fear against them. The jungle erupted with activity. Patrols converged on the shooting, exactly as Callahan had planned. He was already gone, moving to his next position, but the damage was done. Now they knew the ghost wasn't just alive, he was hunting them. In his command post, Bao Nguyen listened to the growing chaos with narrowed eyes. How many men lost? 5 confirmed, Captain, an aide reported. No sign of the sniper. Bao stood, moving to the map. His finger found the pattern in the kills, a deliberate spiral, drawing their forces into an ever-widening search. This was no wounded animal fleeing into the brush. This was a predator, creating his own hunting ground. He's playing with us, Bao said softly, testing our responses, learning our patterns. A thin smile crossed his face. Interesting. Callahan, concealed in the growing light of dawn, checked his remaining ammunition. 14 rounds for the M40, 2 magazines for the captured AK-47. Not much, but enough. He'd learned long ago that fear was a force multiplier. They're starting to understand, Hawk's voice came again, but they still don't know what they're dealing with. No, Callahan thought, they didn't, but they would. He selected his next position carefully. The sun was rising, painting the jungle, in shades of gold and shadow, perfect hunting light. Below he could hear the VC regrouping, adopting tighter formations. They were learning, but too late. The ghost was no longer running. The ghost was at war, and war was just beginning. The first explosion ripped through the morning air, followed quickly by another. Sheets of napalm painted the canopy an orange hell light as the VC tried to flush out their hunters. They're desperate, Hawk's voice observed in Callahan's mind, burning their own jungle. Callahan watched from his elevated position as flames consumed the sector he'd just vacated. Amateur move. The fire would only create more shadows, more confusion, more weapons for him to use. He'd spent the last hour preparing this section of jungle, rigging vines with empty shell casings, positioning branches to catch the wind. Now, as the flames drove the VC forward, each breeze created phantom movements, metallic whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. There! A VC soldier opened fire at a swaying branch. Others joined in, burning through precious ammunition. When they finally approached to check the kill, they found nothing but smoke and dancing shadows. In his command post, Bao Nguyen studied the latest reports with growing fascination. How many casualties now? 11 dead, Captain. 3 more missing. His aide's voice carried an edge of fear. The men say... They say he's everywhere. No. Bao traced the pattern of kills on his map. He's using the jungle itself against us, making us see him in every shadow. A rare smile crossed his face. Magnificent. Back in the burning forest, Callahan had turned the VC's own tactics against them. The napalm smoke created perfect cover, and the chaos of their advance masked his movement through the canopy. Every shot was calculated not just for the kill, but for the message it sent. Show them nowhere is safe, Hawk whispered. A VC officer raised his binoculars, scanning the tree line. Callahan's shot took him through the left lens. The man behind him died before he could turn. 2 shots, 2 kills. And when the others rushed to help, they found bodies but no shell casings. Ghost! One of them screamed, the English word carrying, over the crackle of flames. He's a ghost! Callahan allowed himself a cold smile. Fear was spreading faster than the fire. Good. Let them feel what his team felt in those final moments. Let them know what it meant to be hunted. Through his scope, he watched their formations deteriorate. Seasoned guerrilla fighters, men who'd spent years mastering jungle warfare, were jumping at shadows. Every rustle of leaves could be death. Every silence could be their last. Hold position, Tran Vu's voice cut through the panic. He's just one man. Just one ghost, Hawk corrected. Show them the difference. Callahan's next kill was Art. He took the point man of a patrol with a shot that seemed to come from the east. When they returned, fire, he dropped another from the west. North, south, each shot from a different direction, each kill precisely timed. To the surviving VC, it must have seemed like they were surrounded by a platoon of snipers. Bao Nguyen's radio crackled with increasingly frantic reports. He listened in silence, dark eyes fixed on his map. This was more than revenge, more than survival. This was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Captain, Tran Vu's voice came through clearly. Request permission to lead the final hunt personally. I can find him. Bao considered. The American sniper had proven himself more than just a skilled marksman. He was a ghost who turned the jungle itself into a weapon. But Tran Vu was his best tracker, a man who'd made his reputation hunting American Special Forces teams. Permission granted, Bao said finally. But Lieutenant, be cautious. This one is different. In the burning jungle, Callahan was already moving. The fire was spreading, forcing everyone to relocate. Perfect. Moving targets were vulnerable. Targets. They're sending their best now, Hawk warned. Tran Vu is coming. Callahan chambered another round. Let him come. The jungle had chosen its master, and it wasn't the VC anymore. Every tree was his ally, every shadow his domain. A twig, snapped somewhere below, deliberate, a probe. Tran Vu was testing him, trying to draw him out. Callahan remained motionless, watching through his scope as the lieutenant's men spread out in a professional search pattern. Finally, a worthy hunt. Remember what you are, Hawk whispered. Remember what they made you. Callahan's finger curled around the trigger. He was more than a sniper now, more than a Marine. He was the thing that lived in darkness, the shadow that brought death. He was the ghost of Quang Tri, and the jungle was his. Something had changed. Callahan felt it in the air, a shift in the jungle's rhythm. The random probes and panicked searches had stopped. Now there was only silence, purposeful and dangerous. He's reading your kills, Hawk's voice warned, learning your patterns. Through his scope, Callahan spotted the signs. Broken branches angled, just so disturbed earth that any normal soldier would miss. Tran Vu wasn't just tracking him. He was reconstructing Callahan's entire strategy, one clue at a time. Clever bastard, Callahan muttered. He shifted position, but his movement lacked its usual fluid grace. Fatigue was setting in. The wounds from the initial ambush throbbed with every heartbeat. A flash of movement caught his eye, a VC soldier moving with almost theatrical clumsiness. Bait. Had it been an hour earlier, Callahan might have taken the shot. Now he recognized the trap for what it was. They're not just hunting you anymore, Hawk observed. They're thinking like you. Tran Vu's voice carried through the trees, speaking in perfect English. You move well, American. Like a ghost. But even ghosts leave trails. Callahan froze. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the same trick he'd been using against them. The lieutenant had learned fast. The first shot splintered the bark near Callahan's head. He rolled, returning fire more by instinct than aim. Two more shots answered from different positions. They'd synchronized their fire, cutting off his escape routes. Move, Hawk's voice urged. It's a closing net. Callahan dropped to a lower branch just as an RPG screamed through his previous position. The explosion showered him with burning splinters. No time to think. He fired twice, dropping 2 VC soldiers. But more appeared, their movements precise and coordinated. This wasn't blind searching anymore. This was a masterfully executed ambush. Your technique is excellent, Tran Vu called. Out again, closer now. But you're tired, wounded. How long can a ghost keep fighting? A bullet found Callahan's thigh, punching through muscle. The pain was immediate, staggering. He nearly lost his grip on the M40, catching it at the last second. Focus, Hawk commanded. Pain is just information. Callahan swung his rifle around, searching for Tran Vu. Instead, he found himself staring at an entire squad, their weapons trained on his position. The lieutenant had used Callahan's own tactics against him, hurting him exactly where they wanted him. The next few seconds were pure chaos. Callahan fired his remaining rounds, each shot finding a target, but it wasn't enough. Return fire shredded his position. A round grazed his shoulder. Another hit his tactical vest, the impact feeling like a sledgehammer to the ribs. There was only one way out. The river rushed below, swollen from recent rains. A 50-foot drop into unknown waters. Certain death, maybe, but certain death waited in the trees too. Sometimes survival means embracing the fall, Hawk whispered. Callahan jumped. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Freezing water closed over his head as the current grabbed him, pulling him under. Above, he heard Tran Vu shouting orders, but the river drowned everything else out. His wounded leg screamed for attention. The cold numbed everything else. Somewhere in the chaos, he lost his grip on the M40. A lifetime of memories went with it. His first deer rifle, modified for war, now lost to the Vietnamese jungle. "Keep moving," Hawk urged. "They'll follow the banks." Callahan fought to the surface, gasping. The current pulled him around a bend out of the VC's line of sight. He angled toward the far bank, every stroke an exercise in agony. From somewhere, upstream, he heard Tran Vu's voice one last time. "Run, Ghost. The hunt is just beginning." Callahan dragged himself onto the muddy bank, shivering despite the jungle heat. His leg wound, pumped blood in steady pulses. The shoulder was a mess of torn flesh. His ribs felt like broken glass. For the first time since the ambush, real fear crept in. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't even the hunter anymore. Tran Vu had proven that. "But you're still alive," Hawk reminded him. "And as long as you're alive, you can fight." Callahan checked his remaining weapons. The captured AK-47, soaked but functional. 2 grenades, a combat knife. Not much to work with, but it would have to do. Somewhere in the jungle, Tran Vu was already plotting his next move. The lieutenant had taken Callahan's measure, matched his game, and nearly won. Nearly. But nearly wasn't enough. Not in this war, not in this jungle. Callahan forced himself to his feet, ignoring the protest of torn muscles and broken bones. The ghost wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The hunt was about to change. The river released Callahan onto a muddy bank, leaving him like forgotten driftwood in the gray morning light. For long minutes he just lay there, face pressed against wet earth, listening to his own ragged breathing. Each inhale brought fresh waves of pain. Broken ribs probably, maybe worse. "Can't stay here, Ghost," Hawk's voice urged. "Blood trail in the water. They'll follow it." Moving was an exercise in agony. The bullet wound in his thigh had torn through muscle, leaving a ragged exit wound that pumped blood in steady pulses. His shoulder was a mess of shrapnel and torn flesh. The river had washed away his field dressing, leaving the original wounds from the ambush exposed and dirty. Callahan dragged himself into the shelter of a fallen banyan tree, its massive root system creating a natural hideout. With trembling hands, he inventoried his remaining supplies, the AK-47, waterlogged but salvageable. 2 magazines also wet. The grenades might still work if he could dry the fuses. His combat knife. A single compression bandage he'd kept secured in a waterproof pocket. "Work with what you've got," he muttered, one of Hawk's favorite sayings. The words helped focus him as he began the brutal task of self-aid. The leg wound was priority. He cut away the sodden pants leg, using strips of the fabric to clean away mud and debris. The bullet had missed the femoral artery. Small mercies. He packed the wound with what little gauze he had, then wrapped it tight with the compression bandage. The pain nearly made him black out. "Stay with it," Hawk encouraged. "Pain means you're alive." From somewhere in the jungle came the distant sound of helicopter rotors. Callahan listened intently, recognizing the signature thump of Huey gunships. Search patterns. The Americans were looking for survivors, but they weren't the only ones. Searching. Through the trees, Callahan caught fragments of radio chatter from a VC patrol. His Vietnamese was limited, but one phrase cut through clearly. "American survivor, Carter, still alive." The name hit him like a physical blow. Sergeant Evan Carter, the team's newest member. Somehow, impossibly, He had survived the initial ambush. "Another ghost," Hawk whispered. "Like you." In his hidden command post, Bao Nguyen studied updated intelligence reports. "The sniper is injured," he told his assembled officers. "The river will have pushed him southeast into Sector 7. Lieutenant Tran Vu, take your best men and—" "Sir," a radio operator interrupted. "Report from the forward post. They've confirmed another American survivor, a sergeant, being held at the river camp." Bao's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "The sniper will come for him," he said finally. "He won't leave a man behind. Set the trap accordingly." Back in his makeshift hide, Callahan forced himself to think through the haze of pain and exhaustion. Carter was alive. Everything changed now. This wasn't just about survival or revenge anymore. He had a mission, but he was in no shape for a rescue. The leg wound made moving agony. His shoulder was severely compromised. The stolen AK-47 had limited ammunition, and he'd lost his beloved M40 to the river. By any rational assessment, he should try to reach friendly lines, report Carter's location for a proper rescue mission. Since when do ghosts care about rational? Hawk's voice carried a hint of amusement. They'll execute Carter the moment they detect any rescue attempt. Callahan knew he was right. Carter's only chance was a ghost, someone who could move unseen, strike without warning, and disappear into shadow. Someone who could turn the jungle itself into a weapon. Moving carefully, he began to dry and clean the AK-47. The weapon was crude compared to his lost M40, but it was reliable. Like him, it could take punishment and keep fighting. His wounds screamed for rest, for proper medical attention. His body was reaching its limits. But deeper than the pain, deeper than the exhaustion, something else burned. Purpose. Carter was out there, probably wounded, definitely scared, waiting for death or rescue. "The question isn't if you're going after him," Hawk observed. "The question is how." Callahan allowed himself a grim smile. The VC thought they had him figured out. Thought they could predict his moves, set their traps accordingly. But they'd forgotten something crucial. A wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. He checked his makeshift bandages one last time, then began to move. Each step was agony, each movement a battle against his body's demands for rest. But Marines don't leave their own behind. Not ever. The ghost had a new hunt to plan, and this time, it wasn't about revenge. It was about salvation. The VC camp materialized out of the morning mist like a predator's den. Callahan counted 4 guard posts, crude but effectively positioned. 2 machine gun nests covering the approaches. A fuel dump near the eastern perimeter. Simple, practical, just like everything else about the Viet Cong's operations. "They're expecting a rescue force," Hawk's voice observed. "Not a ghost." Through his borrowed binoculars, Callahan spotted Carter. They had him tied to a post in the center of camp, visible from all approaches. Another trap. They were using him as bait, expecting a conventional rescue attempt. He looked bad, face swollen from beatings, uniform caked with blood. But he was alive. And more importantly, he was still fighting. Even from this distance, Callahan could see Carter testing his bonds, watching guard patterns, staying alert. Good. He hadn't broken. He hadn't given up. A VC patrol passed below Callahan's position in the canopy. Their formation was tight, professional. These weren't green troops. They were Bao's veterans, the ones who'd survived his night of hunting. "Getting crowded," Hawk warned. "They're reinforcing the camp." Callahan moved like smoke through the branches, pain reduced to a dull background noise through sheer force of will. The leg wound still leaked, but the bleeding had slowed. His shoulder felt like ground glass, but he could shoot. It would have to be enough. The first kill was silent. A lone guard, separated from his post by the call of nature. Callahan's knife found his throat before he could cry out. The man's rifle, a well-maintained M16 probably taken from a dead American, was a welcome upgrade from the waterlogged AK-47. The second guard died just as quietly. This one had grenades. Better still, he had proper detonators. The fuel dump suddenly became much more interesting. "Carter's watching you," Hawk said. "He knows something's happening." Through the scope of his newly acquired rifle, Callahan saw it too. Carter had spotted the missing guards. His posture had changed, tension visible in every line of his body, ready to move when the moment came. The camp's radio crackled. "Outpost 3, report status." "Now or never, Ghost." Callahan triggered the charges he'd set at the fuel dump. The explosion was massive, far bigger than he'd anticipated. Apparently, they'd been storing more than just diesel. Secondary detonations ripped through the camp as ammunition cooked off in the inferno. The response was immediate. Guards ran toward the explosion exactly as trained. Only 2 stayed with Carter, their attention divided between their prisoner and the chaos. 2 shots, 2 kills. Callahan dropped from the canopy, ignoring the screaming protest from his injuries. Carter's eyes widened in recognition as he cut him free. "Sergeant Callahan?" Carter's voice was raw, disbelieving. They said everyone was dead." "Not everyone." Callahan handed him the AK-47. "Can you shoot?" Carter's hands were shaking, but his grip on the weapon was solid. "Yes, sir. They worked me over pretty good, but nothing's broken." "Then let's move. Stay on my 6. Shoot only if—" Machine gun fire cut him off, chewing through foliage where they'd been standing. A second earlier, they dove for cover behind a supply crate as more rounds cracked overhead. "Sir," Carter's voice carried over the chaos. "Sir, that's Bao Nguyen, the one in the officer's uniform." Through the smoke, Callahan caught a glimpse of a tall figure, directing troops with precise hand signals. So this was the architect of the ambush, the man who'd killed his team. "Focus, Ghost," Hawk cautioned. "Get Carter out first. Revenge later." A grenade bounced near their position. Callahan kicked it away, dragging Carter toward the tree line as it exploded. They were badly outnumbered, caught in the open. But the chaos of the burning fuel dump worked in their favor. Smoke obscured their movement, and the continuing explosions masked the sound of their escape. "Move!" Callahan pushed Carter ahead of him, providing covering fire as they broke for the jungle. Bullets whipped past, uncomfortably close. Carter stumbled, but Callahan caught him, half carrying him into the undergrowth. Behind them, Bao Nguyen's voice rose above the firefight. "Let them run. The jungle is sealed. They have nowhere to go." "He's right about that," Hawk observed grimly. They ran until Carter's legs gave out, the younger Marine collapsing against a fallen tree. His breath came in ragged gasps, fresh blood seeping through his uniform. "Sir," he managed between breaths, "what's the plan?" Callahan checked their ammunition, less than he'd hoped, more than he'd feared. "First, we find shelter. Then we remind them why they should have killed us when they had the chance." Carter's eyes held a mix of fear and determination. "They'll hunt us." "No." Callahan allowed himself a cold smile. "We'll hunt them. Rest while you can, Marine. The real war is just beginning." In the distance, they could hear Bao's forces mobilizing. The jungle would soon be alive with hunters. But this time, Callahan wasn't alone. This time, he had something to protect. The ghost had become a guardian, and the hunt was far from over. The jungle's symphony of insects fell silent as another patrol passed nearby. Callahan and Carter remained motionless in their hide, barely breathing. 3 hours of cat and mouse through the undergrowth had left them both exhausted, but the VC net was tightening. Every path seemed to lead to another enemy squad. "They're hurting you," Hawk's voice warned, "like cattle to slaughter." Carter's face was gray with exhaustion, fresh blood seeping through his makeshift bandages. The kid was tough. He hadn't complained once, but he was reaching his limits. "Sir," Carter whispered, voice barely audible, "you should leave me. I'm slowing you down." Callahan's response was immediate. "Marines don't leave Marines." But a new sound cut through the jungle, speakers crackling to life. Then voices, American voices, screaming in agony. Recordings from previous battles, previous deaths. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Carter flinched. Jesus Christ! Psychological warfare, Callahan explained quietly. Bow's trying to break our nerve. The screams continued, punctuated by pleas for mercy. Some of the voices, Callahan recognized. Men he'd served with, men he'd watched die. His hands tightened on his rifle until his knuckles went white. "Don't let him in your head," Hawk cautioned. "That's what he wants." A voice boomed over the speakers. Bao Nguyen himself. "Ghost, can you hear them? Your brothers crying out? How many more will die for your pride?" Carter looked at Callahan, saw something change in the older Marine's eyes. Something cold. Inhuman. "Sir?" Time to change the game. Callahan's voice was different now, distant, calculating. "Watch and learn, kid. This is how you turn fear against them." He moved like a shadow through the trees, setting up his trap. Tripwires made from vines, nooses hidden in the canopy. Carter watched in silent awe as Callahan transformed the jungle into a killing ground. "When I give the signal," Callahan instructed, "fire 2 shots into that thicket. Make them wild like you're panicked, then follow my lead." The plan worked perfectly. Carter's shots brought the closest patrol running. 6 men moving fast, confident they had their prey cornered. The first 2 hit the tripwires, falling hard. The others stopped to help. Exactly as Callahan had predicted. What happened next would haunt Carter's dreams for years. Callahan struck from above, a ghost made flesh. The first man died before he could scream, knife across the throat. The second managed half a cry before a precisely aimed shot took him through the eye. The third and fourth died together, caught in a brutal crossfire between Callahan and Carter. The last 2 tried to run. One made it 3 steps before a hidden noose snapped tight, lifting him into the canopy. The other fell to his knees, begging, in Vietnamese. Callahan emerged from the shadows like death itself. "Tell Bao," he said in the man's language, "the ghost sends his regards." The soldier ran, crying out in terror. They let him go. His fear would spread faster than any bullet. Carter stared at the carnage, at the bodies arranged like some grotesque warning display. "Christ, sir, where did you learn to?" "Montana." Callahan was already stripping the dead of ammunition and supplies. "Hunting elk. The principles are the same. You just have to understand how fear works." As if in response, the speakers crackled again. But this time, Bao's voice held something new, respect mixed with determination. "Impressive, Ghost. You turn my own men's terror against them. But ask yourself, what are you becoming? What monster grows in the shadows of your revenge?" "He's not wrong," Hawk whispered in Callahan's mind. "Look at yourself, brother." Callahan caught his reflection in a puddle of blood. For a moment, he didn't recognize the face staring back. Was there anything human left in those eyes? "Sir?" Carter's voice brought him back. "They're coming. I can hear more patrols." Callahan shook off the moment of doubt. Monster or man, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was survival. What mattered was getting Carter out alive. "Let them come," he said, checking his newly acquired ammunition. "The jungle's about to teach them why some ghosts are better left alone." They moved deeper into the darkness, 2 shadows among many. Behind them, the bodies hung like grim totems, a message to all who followed. This was no longer a hunt. This was war, and war had no room for humanity. The ravine was perfect, a natural funnel carved by centuries of monsoon rains. Steep walls rose on either side, creating a corridor of death barely 30 yards wide. Dense vegetation provided cover while limiting mobility. Most importantly, it had only 2 viable approaches. "This is where we make our stand," Callahan said, studying the terrain through borrowed binoculars. "They'll think they're pushing us into a trap. They won't realize they're walking into one." Carter watched him work, amazed at how the older Marine's mind processed terrain into tactical advantage. Despite his injuries, Callahan moved with predatory purpose, transforming the ravine into an elaborate killing ground. Teaching him, Hawk. Observed, like you taught me. Here. Callahan handed Carter several grenades taken from dead VC. We'll create choke points, force them to bunch up. He demonstrated how to rig the explosives with tripwires. Remember, the first explosion drives them into the second, Carter finished, surprising himself. Like herding cattle. Callahan allowed himself a grim smile. The kid was learning. They worked through the afternoon, setting their trap. Carter's medical training proved unexpectedly useful. He understood anatomy, knew exactly where to place punji stakes for maximum effect. His hands shook less now, fear replaced by grim determination. Sir? Carter asked as they rigged the last explosive. What if they don't come this way? They'll come. Callahan checked his weapon one final time. Tran Vu is hunting us personally now. He won't delegate this to others. As, if summoned by his name, distant gunfire erupted. The VC were starting their sweep, pushing through the jungle in coordinated teams, driving their prey exactly where they wanted them, or so they thought. Showtime, Hawk whispered. Callahan positioned Carter in a natural sniper's nest halfway, up the ravine wall. Remember, let the first group pass, wait for my signal. The younger Marine nodded, settling behind his rifle with newfound confidence. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was fighting back. The first VC patrol entered the ravine cautiously, weapons ready. Professional soldiers, moving in textbook formation. Behind them came more and more, until the narrow space held at least 30 men. Tran Vu's voice carried clearly. The tracks lead here. The ghost is cornered. Now, Hawk urged. Spring the trap. Callahan's shot ignited the first explosive. Keshi. The blast echoed off the ravine walls, amplified into thunder. As planned, the VC instinctively rushed forward, directly into the second explosion. What followed was systematic slaughter. Carter's first shot dropped a radio man. His second took out a machine gunner. Clean kills, no wasted rounds. Something had awakened in him. The same cold precision that made Callahan so lethal. The ravine became a chaos of explosions and screams. Tripwires triggered claymores. Punji stakes claimed their toll. Every attempt to retreat or advance triggered another trap. The natural acoustics amplified the mayhem, making it impossible to locate the attackers. Through his scope, Callahan spotted Tran Vu directing his men with impressive calm. The lieutenant had recognized the trap immediately, but was pushing forward anyway, driven by something beyond duty or logic. Their eyes met across the killing. Ground, recognition, respect, hatred. Callahan's shot should have ended it, a perfect bead on Tran Vu's head. But at the last second, a dying soldier stumbled into the path of the bullet. The lieutenant dove for cover, survival instincts overriding his desire for revenge. Fall back. Tran Vu's command cut through the chaos. Fall back and regroup. The VC retreat was orderly despite their losses. They left behind more than 20 dead, but Callahan knew it wasn't over. Tran Vu had escaped, and with him, any chance of ending this quickly. Jesus, Carter breathed, surveying the carnage below. Did we really do all this? We did what we had to do. Callahan was already moving, gathering what supplies they could use. But Tran Vu will be back, and he'll bring everything he has. Why? Carter asked. Why is he so fixated on us? Not us. Callahan checked the bodies, confirming his kill. Count. Me. I've become his obsession, his chance to prove himself. And you've become something else entirely. Hawk added quietly. Look at what you've created here. The ravine had become a charnel house. The jungle would digest the dead, but the message would spread. The ghost wasn't just surviving anymore. He was waging his own private war. Sir? Carter's voice carried a new edge of confidence. What's our next move? Callahan studied the southern exit of the ravine, already planning. We keep moving, keep fighting, until either we break them, or they break us, Carter finished. No. Callahan's voice was cold. They already tried that. Now they deal with what they created. In the distance, they could hear Tran Vu rallying his forces. The lieutenant had tasted defeat, and it had only made him hungrier. The hunt was about to escalate, and the ghost was ready. The silence should have been his first warning. After 6 hours of steady movement south, the jungle had grown too quiet. No bird calls, no insect sounds. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. But Callahan, exhausted from the ravine battle, missed the signs. "Something's wrong," Hawk's voice urged. "The jungle's trying to tell you something." "We need to rest," Carter said, his improved confidence making him bold enough to speak up. "Check our wounds, regroup." Callahan nodded. They'd earned a breather. The ravine ambush had cost the VC dearly. Surely they'd need time to reorganize, to rethink their strategy. That's exactly what Bao Nguyen had been counting on. In his mobile command post, Bao studied his map with cold satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. His scouts had confirmed Callahan's heading hours ago, factoring in terrain, fatigue, and tactical necessity. The Americans' movements were instinctive, primal, but predictable to someone who understood the mind of a hunter. Like all predators, Bao told his officers, he follows the path of least resistance when wounded. Now, we shepherd him exactly where we want him. He turned to his radio operator. "Signal the fire teams, begin." The first sign of trouble came as a faint smell of smoke. Then a wall of flame erupted to their west, spreading with unnatural speed. Another fire bloomed to the east. Accelerant, Callahan realized too late. They've been laying down fuel paths. Carter's eyes widened. "They're hurting us." "Move!" Callahan grabbed the younger Marine's arm, pushing him forward as the flames closed in. The heat was intense, consuming the jungle's moisture, creating its own wind. Every path they took seemed to lead to another wall of fire. "It's Bao," Hawk warned. "He's thinking like you now." They burst into a clearing, smoke burning their lungs. For a moment, Callahan thought they'd found safety. Then he saw it. The clearing was too perfect, too exposed. Fallen logs provided obvious cover, drawing the eye. The first sniper's bullet kicked up dirt at his feet. "Contact!" Carter shouted, diving for cover. But Callahan knew it was already too late. They'd walked right into it. The clearing erupted with coordinated fire from hidden positions. Not wild spraying, but methodical, disciplined shooting. Every time they moved, bullets cut off their escape. Every piece of cover they sought had been pre-sighted, turned into a killing zone. "This is his masterpiece," Hawk observed grimly. Everything before was just preparation. A bullet clipped Callahan's arm, spinning him around. Another grazed his thigh, reopening the old wound. They were being picked apart with surgical precision. "Sir!" Carter's voice carried over the gunfire. The kid had managed to reach a drainage ditch offering minimal cover. "Over here!" Callahan made a break for it, bullets tracking his movement. He felt one punch through his tactical vest, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Only pure instinct got him to the ditch. "You see it now, don't you?" Bao's voice boomed from hidden speakers. "How it feels to be the prey? To know that every move you make has been anticipated?" Callahan pressed his hand against the new wound, feeling blood seep between his fingers. Nothing vital hit, but it was getting harder to breathe. Carter fired back at their attackers, but his shots were desperate, ineffective. "They've got every angle covered." Through the smoke, Callahan caught glimpses of movement. VC soldiers moving with perfect coordination, tightening the noose. And there, directing them with hand signals, was Tran Vu. The lieutenant's face showed pure predatory satisfaction. For the first time since the ambush that killed his team, Callahan felt real fear. Not of dying, he'd made peace with that, but of failure, of letting Carter down, of losing to men who were beating him at his own game. "Options?" Carter asked, reloading his rifle with shaking hands. Callahan scanned their position. The fires had cut off retreat. The clearing offered no real cover. Every possible escape route would expose them to interlocking fields of fire. Bao had thought of everything. "There's always a way," Hawk insisted. "Think. What would you do if you were hunting you? That's when Callahan saw it. A drainage pipe half hidden by undergrowth. Probably part of an old French irrigation system. Too small for a man to stand in, but just wide enough to crawl through. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "how do you feel about getting dirty?" Carter's eyes found the pipe. A grim smile crossed his face. "Better than getting dead, sir." They waited for the next concentrated barrage, then moved. Carter went first, scrambling into the pipe as Callahan provided covering fire. The younger Marine's wounds made the tight squeeze agony, but fear was a powerful motivator. "Contact left." Tran Vu's voice carried over the chaos. "The pipe! Don't let them—" Callahan's last grenade cut him off, buying precious seconds. Then, he was in the pipe too, pushing through decades of mud and debris, ignoring the screaming protest of his wounds. Behind them, Bao's voice held a note of genuine respect. "Clever, Ghost. But you're still dancing to my tune. The pipe only leads one way deeper into my territory." He was right. They weren't escaping, they were just choosing a different trap. But right now, any trap was better than certain death in that clearing. "Keep moving," Hawk urged. "Live now. Fight later." They crawled through darkness, lungs burning, bodies broken. Behind them, they could hear Tran Vu organizing pursuit teams. Above, the sounds of men trying to cut them off at the pipe's exit. The hunter had become the hunted, and the real game was just beginning. The sniper's bullet embedded itself in the tree trunk inches from Callahan's head, showering him with splinters. Third shot in as many minutes. They were walking their fire closer, probing his position with deadly patience. "They've got us bracketed," Carter whispered from his position behind a fallen log. 6 shooters, maybe more. All elevated positions. Kid learns fast, Hawk observed. When did he start thinking like a sniper? Callahan studied their situation with cold clarity. The drainage pipe had bought them time, but Bao had been ready for that too. They'd emerged into a killing ground. A seemingly random stretch of jungle that had been carefully prepared for exactly this moment. Every apparent cover point was visible from multiple sniper positions. Every escape route led to pre-sighted kill zones. Even the morning sun had been considered. It was at their backs, making it harder to spot movement in the shadows ahead. "Sir?" Carter's voice carried an edge of desperate trust. "Tell me you have a plan." Callahan's mind raced through options, discarding one after another. Direct engagement was suicide. Running meant certain death. Waiting for darkness wasn't an option. Bao's men would push in before dusk. Then he saw it. Not an escape, but a chance. "They're not trying to kill us yet," he said quietly. "They're containing us, wearing us down. Bao wants to break us before he finishes this." Carter absorbed this. "How does that help us?" "It means they're looking for patterns, waiting for desperation to make us predictable." Callahan pulled out his combat knife. "So let's give them what they expect." Working carefully, he began cutting strips from his shirt, smearing them with blood from his wounds. Carter caught on quickly, doing the same. Together, they created a trail of signs: crushed vegetation, disturbed earth, the marks of wounded men stumbling toward apparent safety. "Obvious enough to be believable," Callahan explained, "but not so obvious it looks like a trap." "Teaching him your tricks," Hawk approved, making him more than just a survivor. They rigged their last claymore mine at the end of the false trail, hiding it under leaves. Then came the hardest part: waiting. The first VC scout spotted their trail within minutes. He was good, taking his time, checking for tricks, but ultimately his training worked against him. The signs were exactly what he'd been taught to look for. He signaled his team forward. "Now," Hawk whispered, while they're focused on the bait. Callahan's first shot dropped the rearmost VC soldier, the one watching their flanks. His second took out the radio man before he could call for help. The claymore detonation caught the rest of the team bunched together, turning their careful advance into chaos. "Move!" Callahan grabbed Carter's arm, pulling him up. They sprinted through, the gap created by the explosion using the smoke for cover. Behind them, Tran Vu's voice rose above the confusion. "West side, cut them off at the swamp." They ran hard, ignoring the protest of wounded muscles and broken bodies. Carter was stronger now, keeping pace despite his injuries. The kid had changed, hardened. Fear had become fuel, but Bao had planned for this too. The ground beneath their feet turned treacherous, solid earth giving way to swamp. Thick mud grabbed at their boots, making each step a battle. The vegetation changed too. Less cover, more exposed ground. "Perfect kill zone," Carter gasped, understanding dawning in his eyes. "They're pushing us into a trap." "He's right, Hawk. Warned." This is what Bao wanted all along. Through his scope, Callahan spotted movement on both banks of the swamp. VC soldiers moving into position, unhurried, professional. They didn't need to rush. The mud would do their work for them. "Options?" Carter asked, the word nearly lost in his labored breathing. Callahan studied the terrain ahead. The swamp narrowed, channeled between two rises. And there, barely visible through the mist, a bridge. Old French construction, probably part of the same colonial infrastructure as the drainage pipe. "One. Way out," he said grimly. "We take that bridge." Carter's laugh held no humor. "They'll be waiting." "Of course they will." Callahan checked his remaining ammunition, less than he'd hoped. "That's why we're going to give them a show they'll never forget." Through the rising mist, they could hear Tran Vu organizing his, and the lieutenant's voice carried anticipation. He could taste victory. But Callahan had learned something about victory in the past day. Sometimes it looked exactly like defeat. Until it didn't. "Ready?" he asked Carter. The younger Marine's eyes held steel now, not fear. "Born ready, sir." Together they began their advance through the swamp. Each step could be their last. Each moment could bring the killing shot. But they weren't prey anymore. They were ghosts. And ghosts didn't die easily. The French colonial bridge rose through the morning mist like the skeleton of some ancient beast. Wooden planks, weathered by decades of monsoons, spanned a gorge that dropped nearly 100 feet to jagged rocks below. The far side promised escape, if they could reach it. 8 guards visible, Hawk noted as Callahan studied the bridge through his scope. More in the tree line. Radio antenna on the far bank. Command post. "They're waiting for us," Carter whispered. His voice was stronger now despite his wounds. "But something's off about their positioning." Callahan felt a surge of pride. The kid wasn't just observing anymore. He was thinking like a hunter. "What do you see?" "Their fields of fire don't overlap properly. Those machine gun nests, they're too obvious, almost like they want us to see them," Callahan finished. "Good eye. Tran Vu's learned our tricks. Those positions are bait." They lay in the mud, studying the bridge defenses. The obvious route would be to try sneaking across under cover of darkness. That's exactly what Tran Vu would expect, and he'd have night vision gear ready. "Sir," Carter said quietly, "we could try finding another way around." "No. Bao's got every other route locked down. This bridge is our only shot." Callahan's mind worked through possibilities, but if they're expecting stealth, give them the opposite, Hawk suggested. Sometimes the best ambush is the one they see coming. Callahan outlined his plan. It was audacious, borderline suicidal, but Carter didn't hesitate, didn't question. He just nodded, eyes showing complete trust. They moved separately. Carter crawled through the underbrush toward the bridge's near side, carrying their remaining explosives. Callahan circled wide, using the terrain to approach from an unexpected angle. The first phase went perfectly. 2 sentries died silently, knives across their throats. Carter planted the explosives at key structural points while Callahan eliminated a sniper team with precise shots. Then, everything went wrong. "Ghost!" Tran Vu's voice shattered the morning silence. The lieutenant stepped out onto the bridge, wearing a satisfied smile. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize your hand in this, that I wouldn't be ready?" Hidden troops emerged from camouflaged positions. At least 20 men, weapons trained on the bridge. They'd known Callahan's plan all along, had probably even let him get this far. He's learned too well, Hawk warned. He's thinking like you. Now, surrender, Tran Vu called out. Die with honor instead of running like a coward. Callahan's response was a single shot, not at Tran Vu, but at the first explosive charge Carter had planted. The blast rocked the bridge, sending several VC soldiers stumbling. What followed was chaos incarnate. Carter opened fire from his hidden position, his shots precise despite his injuries. Callahan moved like a demon, using the confusion to close distance. The bridge became a killing ground as both sides exchanged fire at point-blank range. A bullet caught Carter in the shoulder, spinning him onto the bridge. Callahan reached him just as Tran Vu's men started a coordinated advance from both ends. Like rats in a trap, Tran Vu called out, real hatred in his voice now. No more tricks, Ghost. Nowhere left to run. Callahan looked at Carter. The younger Marine's eyes held no fear, only grim determination and complete trust. Sir, Carter said quietly, whatever you're thinking, do it. Callahan triggered the remaining charges. The bridge shuddered. Support cables snapped like rifle shots. The entire structure began to tilt as its anchoring points failed. No! Tran Vu's scream carried pure rage as he realized what was happening. Kill them! Kill them now! The air filled with desperate gunfire as the bridge gave way. Callahan grabbed Carter, dragging him toward the far bank as the wooden planks began to separate. A bullet caught Callahan in the side. Another grazed his neck. The bridge was falling away beneath them, but the far bank was still 10 feet ahead. Jump, Hawk's voice urged. Now! They leaped together as the bridge collapsed. For a moment, they were suspended in space, two ghosts flying over an abyss of certain death. Then impact. Hard ground. Rolling, tumbling, but alive. Through the settling dust and debris, Callahan saw Tran Vu on the other side of the gorge. The lieutenant's face was a mask of fury and frustration, but underneath that rage was something else, a burning obsession that Callahan recognized all too well. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Sir, Carter gasped, clutching his wounded shoulder. That was insane, Callahan finished, forcing himself to his feet despite the screaming protest of his new wounds. I was going to say beautiful. A ghost of a smile crossed Carter's blood-streaked face. They stumbled into the tree line as morning sun burned away the last of the mist. Behind them, they could hear Tran Vu ordering his men to find another crossing point, but they had bought time. Paid for it in blood and pain and astronomical luck, but they had it. He'll come for you, Hawk warned. Both of them will. Tran Vu's pride won't let this go, and Bao will adapt, Callahan finished grimly. Change tactics. Try something new. He helped Carter up, supporting the younger Marine's weight. They weren't finished, not even close. But something had changed on that bridge. They were no longer just running. They were fighting back. And the war was far from over. The cave offered shelter, but not peace. Callahan tended to Carter's wounds in silence, his mind replaying the bridge battle. They'd escaped, barely. But something felt wrong. The pursuit had stopped too suddenly, too completely. He's planning something, Hawk warned. Bao doesn't just give up. As if in response to the thought, music drifted through the jungle. American music. House of the Rising, sun playing from hidden speakers. The song cut off abruptly, replaced by a voice Callahan recognized. Jenkins from his squad screaming for mercy in his final moments. Carter's face went pale. Sir, don't listen, Callahan ordered, but the voices continued. Thompson begging, for his mother. Martinez praying in Spanish, each death preserved, weaponized. He's in your head, Hawk cautioned. That's where he wants to be. Callahan moved to the cave entrance, scanning the trees. The morning mist had burned away, leaving the jungle uncomfortably exposed. That's when he saw it. A VC soldier's body tied to a massive banyan tree, carefully positioned to be visible from their hideout. The man's chest had been cut open, a piece of paper planted where his heart should be. "Sir, don't," Carter pleaded, reading Callahan's intent. "It's a trap." But Callahan was already moving. The dead soldier was one of Tran Vu's men. He recognized the unit patches. The paper in his chest was high-quality stationery, the message written in elegant English. "Ghost, you've proven yourself worthy. Come to the temple ruins at sunset. End this as warriors should. Or run, and listen to your friends die forever." Bow below the message were coordinates. "He's calling you out," Carter said, reading over Callahan's shoulder. "Sir, you can't seriously be considering this. We should make for friendly lines while we have the chance." "Kid's right," Hawk agreed. "This is exactly what Bow wants." The speakers crackled again. This time it was Hawk's voice, his last words before the shot that killed him. "Sorry, brother. Looks like this is my stop." Something broke inside Callahan. All the careful tactical thinking, all the strategic patience, it crumbled under the weight of remembered loss. "Sir?" Carter's voice seemed to come from far away. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Bow's right." Callahan's voice was distant, cold. "This needs to end. It's suicide. He'll have the entire area fortified, probably 100 men. Which is why you're not coming." Callahan turned to Carter, his decision made. "There's a Marine fire base 12 clicks southeast. Follow this ridge, stay low, you'll make it." Carter's face showed betrayal, fear, and something else, understanding. "You're going to your death. Maybe." Callahan checked his weapons one last time. "Or maybe I'm going to show Bow what happens when you push a ghost too far." "Sir?" Carter struggled for words. "You got me out. You kept me alive. Don't throw that away for revenge." "Listen to him," Hawk urged. "This isn't you. This is what Bow wants you to become." But the voices from the speakers continued, an endless loop of death and pain. His team's final moments played over and over, driving spikes of rage through Callahan's carefully constructed walls. Revenge. He allowed himself a cold smile. "No, this is about finishing what they started. One way or another, it ends tonight." Carter tried one last time. "Then let me come with you. We can—" "No." Callahan's tone left no room for argument. "You're a survivor now, kid. You've earned that. Don't waste it." He handed Carter his remaining water and most of their ammunition. The younger Marine took them numbly, understanding the finality of the gesture. "How?" Carter's voice cracked. "How did he know? How did Bow know exactly how to break you?" "Because he's like me," Callahan said quietly. "He understands what makes a hunter hunt, what drives a ghost to keep fighting." "He understands too well," Hawk warned. "You're walking into his web." But Callahan was already checking the coordinates, plotting his route. The temple ruins were deep in VC territory, a place where ancient gods had once been worshipped, where new sacrifices would soon be made. "If I don't make it," he told Carter, Tell them their deaths mattered. All of them." Carter straightened despite his wounds, snapping a perfect salute. "It's been an honor, sir." Callahan returned the salute, then melted into the jungle. Behind him, the speakers continued their psychological assault, but he didn't hear them anymore. His mind was clear, focused on a single purpose. Bow wanted to meet the ghost? Fine. He'd show him exactly what a ghost could do when pushed past the point of no return. The hunt was about to become a reckoning. The temple ruins emerged from the jungle like a mouthful of broken teeth, ancient stone worn smooth by centuries of monsoons. Callahan counted 4 machine gun nests, 6 sniper positions, and at least 30 men on patrol. Standard perimeter security for a VC command post. Too standard. "He's making it easy," Hawk warned, "drawing you in." The first guard died silently, Callahan's knife finding the sweet spot between cervical vertebrae. The second never even knew he was there. Each kill was textbook perfect, each movement calculated for maximum efficiency. But it felt wrong. The guards were too predictable, their patterns too clean. Through gaps in the stone walls, Callahan caught glimpses of the compound's interior. What he saw made his blood run cold. American bodies arranged in grotesque tableaus, posed like mannequins in a carnival of death. Some wore expressions of terror, flash preserved by whatever Bao's men had done to them. Others seemed peaceful, almost sleeping, which was somehow worse. This is what he is. Hawk's voice was grim. What he wants you to become. A movement caught Callahan's eye. A figure ducking into a doorway. The stance. The careful economy of motion. He recognized Bao Nguyen instantly. The VC commander wasn't hiding. He was inviting pursuit. Against every instinct, Callahan followed. The temple's interior was a maze of corridors and chambers, each corner holding potential death. Ancient Buddhist carvings watched with empty eyes as he moved deeper into the labyrinth. The air grew thick with incense and decay. Then he heard, "Sadisu," boots on stone approaching fast. Callahan spun, weapon ready, but Tran Vu was faster. The lieutenant's first strike knocked the rifle from his hands. The second nearly took his head off. They crashed together in the narrow corridor, all finesse forgotten in brutal close-quarters combat. Tran Vu fought with cold precision, each move designed to disable or kill. But there was something else in his attacks, a desperate need to prove himself. "I am the better hunter." Tran Vu's knife sliced air where Callahan's throat had been. "I am the true ghost." Callahan caught the next strike, turning it into a joint lock, but Tran Vu rolled with it. They separated, circling each other in the dim light, both bleeding now, both running on pure hatred and adrenaline. "You're nothing but a pale copy," Callahan spat, a shadow trying to be a ghost. Tran Vu's response was savage, a combination of strikes that drove Callahan back. One blow connected, reopening the wound in his side. Another nearly took his eye. "He's hurting you," Hawk realized too late. "This whole fight is—" The floor disappeared. Callahan fell hard, landing in some kind of pit chamber. The impact drove. The air from his lungs sent waves of agony through his battered body. Above, Tran Vu's laughter echoed off stone walls. "Welcome, ghost." Bao Nguyen's voice came from somewhere in the darkness. "I've been expecting you." Lights flared, revealing a chamber filled with VC soldiers, weapons aimed. Bao stood among them, elegant and composed in his officer's uniform. His eyes studied Callahan with clinical interest. "Predictable," Bao said softly. "Just like all hunters. Show them the prey they want most, and they forget everything else." Callahan tried to rise, but his legs wouldn't respond. Some kind of drug in the air, he realized. The incense. He'd been breathing it since he entered the temple. "You see it now, don't you?" Bao moved closer, genuine curiosity in his voice. "How alike we are. Two ghosts, haunting the same jungle. But there's a difference between us." He knelt, meeting Callahan's fading gaze. "I embrace what I am. You still pretend to be human." "Go to hell," Callahan managed, but the words were slurred. Bao smiled. "Hell? My friend, hell is what I'm going to show you. By the time we're done, you'll understand exactly what kind of monster you really are." The last thing Callahan saw before consciousness faded was Tran Vu's face, watching him with predatory satisfaction. The lieutenant had won their game of cat and mouse, but somehow that didn't seem to matter anymore. "Stay alive," Hawk's voice urged from far away. "Whatever happens, stay alive." Then darkness took him, and the ghost of Quang Tri became just another trophy in Bao's collection. The real horror was about to begin. Pain was a language Callahan had learned to speak fluently over the past 2 days. Every nerve ending had its own dialect of agony, each muscle its own symphony of torment. But pain was just information. And information could be processed, analyzed, used. "Count the footsteps," Hawk's voice guided him. "Map their patterns. Pain ends. Knowledge lasts." 4 guards rotated every 6 hours. The one with the limp always took the north corridor. The youngest, probably not more than 17, watched him with barely concealed fear. Small details, building a larger picture. Still analyzing, Ghost? Bao's voice carried genuine amusement. Even now your mind works like a hunter's. Callahan opened his swollen eyes. The VC commander sat comfortably in a wooden chair, studying him like a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. The Americans are planning something, Bao continued conversationally. A major offensive. You know the details. Why suffer needlessly? A bowl of water sat on a table just out of reach. Callahan's throat burned with thirst, but he forced a bloody smile. Go fuck yourself. The beating that followed was methodical, professional. They knew exactly how to cause maximum pain without risking unconsciousness. But through it all, Callahan kept counting, keep tracking, building his mental map of the compound. Bring him, Bao ordered when they finished. They dragged Callahan through torchlit corridors to a larger chamber. The sight that greeted him almost broke his composure. Carter knelt in the center of the room, bound and bloodied. The younger Marine's face showed evidence of brutal treatment, but his eyes still held defiance. Sir, Carter managed through split lips. I'm sorry, they were waiting. Silence! Tran Vu's rifle butt caught Carter in the back of the head. Focus, Hawk urged as rage threatened to overwhelm Callahan's careful observation. Use this. Learn from it. Your young friend tried to reach the American lines, Bao explained. Quite impressive, actually. He eliminated 3 of my men before. We caught him. You've taught him well. Callahan said nothing, but pride mixed with his anger. The kid had fought, had become more than just a survivor. Now, Bao continued, perhaps we can have a real conversation. Tell me about the offensive and your protege lives. Resist. He gestured to Tran Vu, who pressed his rifle against Carter's head. Carter's eyes met Callahan's. The message was clear. Don't tell them anything. The next few hours were a masterclass in psychological torture. They hurt Carter just enough to make Callahan feel responsible, but not enough to risk death. Each scream was calculated to wear down his resistance. But something unexpected happened. With each passing hour, each new torment, Callahan felt his mind becoming clearer. Pain ceased to be an enemy and became a tool. Every guard rotation, every shift change, every small detail clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle. They think they're breaking you, Hawk observed. They don't realize they're teaching you. The young guard's hands shook when he delivered water. The one with the limp took 3 seconds longer to react to sounds. Tran Vu's pride made him predictable. He always wanted to be the one delivering the worst blows. Small weaknesses, tiny flaws in their perfect system. Remarkable, Bao said during one of their sessions. Most men break by now, but you're actually getting stronger. Callahan spat blood onto the stone floor. You don't understand what I am. No? Bao leaned closer, genuinely curious. Then tell me, Ghost, what are you? The answer came from Carter, his voice weak but steady. He's a fucking legend. The beating that followed was savage, but Callahan saw something new in Bao's eyes, the first glimmer of doubt. The VC commander had expected to break him, to prove they were the same kind of monster. Instead, he'd awakened something else. That night, as they hung suspended in their chains, Carter whispered, Sir, whatever you're planning, I'm ready. Kid knows you too well, Hawk approved. He sees it coming. Callahan tested his restraints one final time. The metal was old, corroded by jungle moisture. The guards were tired, falling into predictable patterns. Everything was in place. Rest, he told Carter quietly. Tomorrow, we remind them why you don't cage a ghost. In his private chambers, Bao studied reports of American troop movements, trying to piece together the puzzle without Callahan's cooperation. He didn't notice the change in atmosphere, the subtle shift in the temple's rhythm. He didn't realize his perfect trap had become a perfect opportunity. The ghost was about to show them all exactly what kind of legend he really was. And this time there would be no mercy. The young guard never saw it coming. One moment he was delivering the evening water ration, the next Callahan's chains. carefully weakened over 3 days of subtle work, wrapped around his throat. No sound, no struggle, just the quiet efficiency of a predator reclaiming his place in the food chain. Perfect, Hawk approved. Now show them what a ghost can really do. The guard's keys opened Carter's restraints. The younger Marine could barely stand, but his eyes were clear. "Sir, how long have you been planning this?" "Since the moment they brought us in." Callahan checked the guard's weapon. An American M16, well maintained. Every beating was a lesson. Every torture session showed me another weakness. They moved silently. Through torch-lit corridors, Callahan supporting most of Carter's weight. The temple's architecture worked in their favor. Ancient ventilation shafts created confusion, making sounds echo unpredictably. The first patrol died without raising the alarm. 3 men eliminated with surgical precision. Callahan took their grenades and ammunition, remembering the compound's layout from his careful mental mapping. "The ammunition depot," he whispered to Carter. "Third chamber on the left. That's our diversion." A guard turned the corner ahead. His eyes widened in recognition, but Callahan's knife found his throat before he could shout, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Sir," Carter's voice was weak but determined, "I can help. Give me a weapon. Soon." Callahan eased him behind a stone pillar. "But first we create chaos." The ammunition depot was poorly guarded. Overconfidence, Bao's one weakness. 2 grenades through the doorway, then run. The explosion shook the entire temple, sending ancient stones raining down. Shouts of confusion filled the compound. Running feet. Orders being barked in Vietnamese. "Perfect." "Now they dance to your tune," Hawk observed. Callahan moved like a shadow through the growing chaos, eliminating key targets with cold efficiency. The radio operator, the heavy weapons team, the guards at the main gate. Each death triggered more confusion, more panic. "Ghost!" Bao's voice carried over the mayhem. "You think I didn't plan for this?" Flares illuminated the compound, turning night to day. Dozens of VC soldiers emerged from hidden positions, weapons ready. A perfect containment strategy. But Callahan had been counting on that too. The charges he'd planted during their torture sessions, tiny packages of explosives taken from dead guards hidden in shadow, detonated simultaneously. The coordinated blasts created a corridor of chaos through the VC positions. "Move!" Callahan grabbed Carter, half carrying him through the gap. Bullets whipped past as Tran Vu's men tried to re-establish their firing lines. Then Bao did something unexpected. He laughed. "Beautiful." The VC commander's voice held genuine admiration. "You made us think we were breaking you, but you were studying us the entire time. Truly, you are a worthy opponent." A bullet caught Callahan in the shoulder, but he barely felt it. Another grazed Carter's leg. They were almost at the tree line. "Sir," Carter gasped. "They're not really trying to kill us." "No." Callahan's voice was grim. "Bao's letting us escape. He wants this to continue." Through the chaos, they caught glimpses of Bao directing his men with calculated precision. The VC commander was orchestrating their escape, turning it into another move in his elaborate game. "He's not finished with you," Hawk warned. "This is just the beginning." They reached the jungle's edge as dawn painted the sky in shades of blood. Behind them, the temple burned. Its ancient stones witnessed to yet another battle in an endless war. Carter, despite his wounds, managed a weak smile. "Sir, that was a tactical retreat," Callahan finished, checking their surroundings. "Nothing more." But they both knew it was more than that. Something had changed in the temple. Bao had tried to break the ghost, to prove they were the same kind of monster. Instead, he'd unleashed something far more dangerous. A predator with purpose. Through the trees, they heard Bao's final message of the night. "Run, ghost. Run far and fast. But remember, the jungle is where monsters like us truly belong." Callahan's response was to put another charge's worth of distance between them and the temple. But Bao's words followed, echoing in his mind. The ghost was free again. But freedom had come with a price. And the real war was just beginning. The first of Bao's elite guards died at dawn, his throat opened by a single knife stroke. Callahan left the body arranged carefully, a message written in blood and shadow. By noon, 3 more had fallen, each death more elaborate than the last. Teaching them fear, Hawk approved, like they taught you. Carter watched from their hiding spot as Callahan prepared for the next phase. The younger Marine had argued against being left behind, but his wounds made him a liability in what was to come. "Sir," Carter said quietly, "what if this is what Bao wants? Another game? Then we change the rules." Callahan checked his stolen weapons one final time. "This isn't about winning anymore, it's about ending it." The jungle had become Callahan's canvas, and death was his art. Each false trail led to a carefully planned kill zone. Every broken branch and disturbed leaf told a story that only other hunters could read. From his command post, Bao studied the pattern of bodies with growing unease. "He's not running," he told his officers. "He's hunting us. All of us." "Let me take a full platoon," Tran Vu insisted. "We'll sweep the entire sector." "No." Bao's voice carried an edge of fear none of them had heard before. "That's exactly what he wants, to split us up, to pick us apart one by one." But Tran Vu's pride wouldn't let him listen. The lieutenant gathered his best men, determined to prove himself the superior predator. They moved into the jungle like shadows following tracks that seemed too obvious, too easy to read. He never learned, Hawk observed. A real hunter knows when he's being hunted. The first explosion caught them in a narrow ravine. The second drove them toward prepared firing positions. Callahan's shots came from impossible angles, dropping men before they could return fire. "Ghost!" Tran Vu's scream echoed through the trees. "Face me, or are you afraid?" Callahan's response was another dead guard, this one left hanging from a tree in Tran Vu's path. A message carved into his chest. "Ghosts don't fear shadows." Back at the command post, Bao received the reports with growing dread. His perfect control was slipping. The hunter he'd tried to break had emerged stronger, more lethal, more monstrous than even Bao had imagined. "Sir," an aide reported, "Lieutenant Tran Vu has gone ahead alone. He says the ghost has challenged him personally." Bao closed his eyes. Pride. It's always pride that kills us in the end. In the deepening twilight, Callahan set his final pieces in motion. Tran Vu's obsession had made him predictable, driven him away from Bao's strategic control. Now he moved through the jungle like a man possessed, following the trail of bodies and blood. "You've become his whole world," Hawk said, "his reason for existing." "Let him come," Callahan whispered to the gathering darkness. "Let him learn what a real ghost can do." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Tran Vu's death would draw Bao out, force him to abandon his careful strategies. The VC commander wouldn't be able to resist witnessing the final act of their deadly drama. Carter watched Callahan make his preparations with a mixture of awe and fear. The man he'd known, the skilled but human Marine, had transformed into something else. Something that belonged to the jungle's darkest shadows. "What are you now?" Carter asked softly. Callahan's smile held no warmth. "I'm what they created. What they needed me to be." Through the trees they heard Tran Vu's voice again. "I'm coming for you, Ghost. I'll show them all who the true hunter is." "He's ready," Hawk warned. The final hunt begins. Callahan melted into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness that had claimed his soul. Somewhere ahead, Tran Vu rushed toward his destiny, driven by pride and obsession. And in his command post, Bao Nguyen prepared for the inevitable confrontation, knowing that when the sun rose again, only one ghost would still haunt these shadows. The jungle held its breath, waiting for blood. The fog rolled through the jungle, like phantom breath, turning familiar shadows into shifting specters. Somewhere in that gray void, 2 hunters circled each other, each seeking the perfect moment to strike. "He's close," Hawk whispered. "You can feel him." Callahan moved like liquid shadow, every step placed with deadly precision. The wound in his side had reopened, leaving a trail of blood drops too small for normal eyes to track. But Tran Vu wasn't normal. The lieutenant was a product of this war, just like him. A twig snapped. Too obvious. Too deliberate. "He's learning your tricks," Hawk warned. Callahan sidestepped the burst of gunfire that followed, the muzzle flash momentarily illuminating Tran Vu's position. The lieutenant was good, changing location immediately after firing. But Callahan was better. "Is this how a ghost fights?" Tran Vu's voice seemed to come from everywhere. "Dancing in shadows? Come face me like a warrior." Callahan's response was a thrown knife that sliced through the fog where Tran Vu's head had been seconds before. The lieutenant's counterattack was immediate. A burst of automatic fire followed by complete silence. They were speaking a language few men could understand. Every movement was a word, every attack a sentence in their deadly conversation. A grenade arced through the mist. Callahan caught it and threw it back in one fluid motion. The explosion illuminated the fog like heat lightning, and in that brief flash their eyes met. Recognition, respect, hatred. "You think you're superior?" Tran Vu's laugh was harsh. "You're just another American playing at being a jungle warrior." "No." Callahan's voice was cold. "I'm what you created, what you needed me to be." They came together like colliding storms. Rifles were forgotten as the fight descended into brutal close combat. Knife against knife, skill against skill, will against will. Tran Vu was fast, his strikes flowing like water. But Callahan had learned to be something else. Something that didn't need speed or strength. Something that simply couldn't be stopped. The lieutenant's blade found Callahan's shoulder, opening, a deep gash. Callahan's response was a knee strike that cracked ribs. They separated, circled, clashed again. "He's getting desperate," Hawk observed. "He knows what's coming." Blood ran freely now, mixing with the fog, turning the air copper-scented. Tran Vu's breaths came in ragged gasps, his perfect form deteriorating. But his eyes still burned with fanatic intensity. "I am the hunter," the lieutenant's voice cracked with desperation. "I am the ghost. I am—" "Nothing." Callahan's knife took him in the kidney, a perfect strike. "You were never the hunter, never the ghost, just a shadow pretending to have substance." Tran Vu staggered, his own blade falling from nerveless fingers. How did you—" "Because I stopped pretending." Callahan moved behind him, blade against throat. "I became what I really am." "And what are you?" Callahan's whisper was the last thing Tran Vu ever heard. "Death." The knife moved once, precisely. The lieutenant's body crumpled, another shadow lost in the fog. Silence returned to the jungle, broken only by the soft patter of blood dripping from Callahan's wounds. He stood over his fallen enemy, feeling nothing but a cold certainty that this had always been inevitable. "Bao will know," Hawk said quietly. "He'll feel it." Miles away, in his command post, Bao Nguyen stood at his map table, suddenly struck by an inexplicable chill. Something had changed in the jungle's rhythm. Something fundamental had shifted. The fog began to lift, revealing the scene of the final duel. Tran Vu's eyes stared sightlessly at the canopy, his face frozen in a mixture of surprise and understanding. He had died knowing the truth. He had never been the predator he pretended to be. Callahan cleaned his blade methodically, ignoring the protests of his various wounds. One ghost down. One to go. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the final act of this bloody drama. Somewhere out there, Bao was preparing for their inevitable confrontation. The VC commander had lost his deadliest weapon, his most faithful lieutenant. Now he would face the real ghost alone. And this time, there would be no games, no elaborate traps, just two monsters meeting in the dark, settling once and for all who truly owned these shadows. The hunt was almost over, and the ghost was ready for his final kill. The temple where Bao waited was different from the others, older, darker, Its ancient stones worn smooth by centuries of monsoon rains. No guards patrolled its perimeter. No traps protected its approaches. The VC commander had stripped away all pretense, all games. This would end as it began. Two ghosts, alone in the dark. "He's waiting for you." Hawk's voice was softer now, almost fading. This is what it's all been leading to. Callahan moved through empty corridors like a shadow given form. His wounds from the fight with Tran Vu had stopped bleeding, but every movement sent waves of dull pain through his body. It didn't matter. Pain was just another ghost now. The first guard died silently, professionally. The second never knew he was there. But these kills felt hollow, mechanical. They weren't part of the real hunt anymore. Bao's voice drifted from deeper within the temple. "I've sent the others away, Ghost. This is between us now." The command center occupied what had once been the temple's inner sanctum. Maps covered the walls, radio equipment hummed softly, and in the center of it all stood Bao Nguyen. The VC commander wore his dress uniform, immaculate despite the jungle's decay. "I knew you'd come," Bao said quietly. "From the moment I saw how you fought, how you thought, I knew it would end like this." Callahan emerged from the shadows, weapon ready. "No more games?" "No more games." Bao's smile held genuine warmth. "We're beyond that now, aren't we? Beyond the petty dance of hunter and hunted. You killed my team. And you killed mine. We're both monsters, Ghost. The only difference is I accepted it long ago." They studied each other across the room, two predators taking each other's measure. Bao's hand rested casually near his pistol. Callahan's finger lay light against his trigger. "You could have run," Callahan said, "and live as less than what I am." Bao shook his head. "No. Like you, I've become something else. Something that can't simply walk away." The first shot came from Bao, blindingly fast, perfectly aimed. But Callahan was already moving, returning fire as he rolled behind a stone pillar. Their bullets carved chunks from ancient walls, stirred up dust that was centuries old. "Beautiful!" Bao's laugh echoed off temple stones. "This is what I wanted. No tricks, no elaborate plans, just pure..." His words cut off as Callahan's shot grazed his shoulder. The VC commander dove for cover, still smiling despite the blood now staining his uniform. They dueled through the temple's shadows, neither able to land a killing blow. Each man had studied the other too long, knew too much about how his opponent thought. Until Callahan did something Bao never expected. He stepped into the open. "What are you doing?" Hawk demanded. "Ending it," Callahan said softly. Bao emerged from cover, weapon trained on Callahan's heart. "You think I won't shoot? I think you'll try, but you'll hesitate, because deep down you need to prove you're better than me. Need to prove you're the superior ghost." Understanding dawned in Bao's eyes, but too late. His shot went wide as Callahan's bullet found his chest, the impact spinning him around. "How?" Bao managed as he fell. "How did you know?" Callahan knelt beside his fallen enemy. "Because I'm not trying to prove anything anymore." A weak laugh bubbled from Bao's bloodied lips. Then you truly have become death itself." His eyes began to glaze. "Tell me, Ghost, was it worth it? Did vengeance fill the emptiness?" But Callahan had no answer. He felt nothing as he watched his nemesis die. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just a hollow echo where emotion used to live. "Sir?" Carter's voice came from the temple entrance. The younger Marine had followed despite orders to stay hidden. Is it over?" Callahan stood slowly, feeling the weight of his wounds, his exhaustion, his transformation. "The killing's over. But the ghost lives on," Hawk finished quietly. "In the jungle, in your nightmares, in what you've become." Around them, the temple's shadows seemed to whisper with the voices of the dead. His team, Bao's men, all the souls claimed by their private war. The jungle had taken everything from him, transformed him into something beyond human, and now he had to live with what he'd become. "Come on," he told Carter. "Let's go home." But as they left the temple, as dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and gold, Callahan knew there was no real home anymore, not for things like him. The ghost would always belong to the shadows, and the shadows would never let him go. Night descended like a bruise, deep purple bleeding into absolute black. Callahan moved with a predator's grace, Carter trailing behind, him like a wounded shadow. The jungle didn't forget. The jungle didn't forgive. "Stay close," Callahan muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "And step exactly where I step." Carter's hands trembled, still sticky with dried blood from his own wounds. The medic who'd never expected to become a survivor now clung to Callahan, like he was the last thread of sanity in a world gone mad. The distant rumble of artillery grew louder, American firepower preparing to erase the evidence of their most covert operations. Bao Nguyen's command post would become nothing more than a memory, scorched from the earth. Callahan's mind drifted to Hawk, to the men they'd lost. Each step was a memorial, each breath a silent prayer for those who'd fallen. The jungle had been their battlefield, their tomb, their confession. "How?" Carter's voice cracked. "How are you doing this?" Callahan didn't turn, didn't break stride. Doing what? Surviving. Moving. After everything. A distant explosion lit the tree line. For a moment, the jungle became a negative of itself. Shadows turning to light. Light consuming shadows. Callahan had seen this dance 100 times. 100 near deaths that meant nothing and everything. "Some men are built for this," Callahan said. "Some men become the weapon before the weapon is fired." They moved through the night. Viet Cong patrols moved like ghosts around them, close enough to touch, yet never seeing. Callahan had become more than a man. He was a current of darkness, a whisper between the trees. Dawn broke like a fever. Distant helicopter sounds. American. The extraction point. Safety. If such a thing existed anymore. Carter stumbled. Callahan caught him without looking, a mechanical precision born of countless missions. "We made it," Carter said, something between a laugh and a sob. The helicopter waited in a small clearing, rotors cutting through the morning mist. As they approached, Callahan felt the weight of everything unsaid, everything unredeemed. Carter looked at him, really looked. "What do we tell them?" he asked. Callahan stared back at the jungle. A place of death, a place of survival, a place that would consume their memories like it consumed everything else. "Nothing," he said. They wouldn't believe it anyway. The helicopter lifted. The jungle remained, silent, waiting. Some stories are never meant to be told. Some men are never meant to return. The ghost disappeared, becoming nothing more than a whisper, a legend, a memory dissolving into the green. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.